Hello everyone, we welcome you to Glass Academy Webinars 2022. The theme for this year is Ideas in Architecture, expanding to I for innovation, B, design thinking, emerging trends around the world, and sensibility. Today we have with us architect Jinu Kurien. Architect Jinu is a founder and principal architect at Design Work, a Mumbai-based, award-winning, and cross-disciplinary practice. He is also an adjunct faculty at Pillai's College of Architecture with a focus on humanities and architecture theory. He co-founded Design in Schools, an initiative that takes a subject like design to K-12 schools to build design awareness and appreciation. We welcome you, sir. We are delighted to have you here with us, and we are looking forward to your presentation. Let's hear it from you on design thinking for housing design. Over to you.
Right. So thank you, Radhika, for the introduction, and I'll share my screen. Okay. So once again, hello everyone, and thank you to Ethos and Saint Gobain and everybody who's made these Glass Academy webinars happen. My presentation is called Design Thinking and Housing, and I will have three parts to this presentation. I'll start with an introduction to my engagements with architecture, and then move to a segment where I talk about the design of a unit, and that segment will be called 30 square meter imaginations. And I will end with a section called actions and consequences. So that's the structure of the presentation. So on to the introduction. So I'm an adjunct faculty at Pillai College of Architecture, where I have been teaching humanities and architectural theory for a fairly long time. Recently, I've also started engaging with the housing studio. So these are my engagements with teaching or pedagogy. Besides this, I'm also one of the founders and the principal architect of Design Works. And we are an architecture and communication design practice, and we are based out of Navi Mumbai in Maharashtra. And our engagements with practice is fairly diverse, and I'll just quickly take you through a snapshot of some of the projects that we do and the sectors that we are engaged with, and through that find an entry into housing, and through that find an entry into affordable housing and the subject that I would like to get to. So we are engaged, like I said, with diverse projects. We do a lot of institutional work, and by institutional work, I'm referring to projects that are from the education sector and projects that are, social or communal in nature. And these engagements include both architecture and communication design. We also design a lot of workplaces for corporations, and those engagements cover different services. It includes interiors, it includes architecture, and assortment of other allied design services. So this is another project. It's the administrative building for a chemicals manufacturing company in one of their plants. So workplaces, we are engaged with, like I said, diverse services. We're also engaged with conventional real estate developments, but at a very limited scale. This is a 30-story tower that we are, a mixed-use tower that we are designing and building in Thane district. And within real estate developments, we are also working on a whole lot of allied spaces, which include hospitality spaces like clubhouses. So these are some snapshots of projects like that. We've been consistently involved with furniture design. This is a furniture suite that we designed and which was awarded the IIID award for excellence in furniture design. And this is a suite that is currently being manufactured and retailed by Godrej Interior. We are also doing a fair amount of signage and wayfinding design engagements. This is some snapshots of a signage pole that we are designing for a university in Navi Mumbai. And there's also an assortment of communication design services. This is the branding and collaterals that we have designed for a startup that is into co-living. Now, besides all of these, we have in the last year also started working on our first affordable housing township, the outskirts of Navi Mumbai. And what you see here is a snapshot of some of the work in progress models and developments. Now, when we started working on this project, we also then started working on the unit of this particular project. And the unit in this case is a 1 BHK, which measures about 30 square meters. Now, this is a project which comes under the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, and there are very specific guidelines in terms of sizes of the unit. And 30 square meter is the cap for the affordable housing segment, one of the caps, I would say. So it's through this project that I would like to enter the subject matter of today, which is design thinking in housing. And what I'd like to do now is, through the design of the unit, get into the segment called 30 square meter imaginations, which is the second part of the presentation. So let me start by just sort of highlighting some of the key aspects of this particular unit, and I'll do that by drawing on it. So this is 1 BHK, and when we say 1 BHK, it means that a house has been compartmentalized into a bedroom, which is this, into a hall, which is that, and into a kitchen, which is this, and a composite washroom, which is that. So these are the compartments that come together to become the 1 BHK. Now, this unit design was actually handed over to us, even before we was actually put in place even before we entered the project. It was almost like a given that we had to carry forward. And when we started looking at the unit, we realized that this is a unit that is extremely rigid and hardly offers any flexibility. Now, why do I call this a rigid unit? And I'd like to just emphasize on that before we move forward. So the construction technology that the developer is using is aluminum form construction, what is popularly known as My1 construction, which means that all the walls are made of concrete. At times, the external walls have insulation, but the internal walls are just concrete without anything else. And because they are concrete, what it means is that these walls cannot be demolished, which means that the compartments that are defined are extremely rigid and flexible. So the rigidity is one aspect of the unit. I will now zoom out a little bit into affordable housing at large, and then just illustrate a few key aspects about it. So when you're doing affordable housing, and when you're doing it at scale, it becomes mass housing, which is affordable. And when you are engaged in a project like that, the entire design process is a balancing act. And it's a balancing act of several opposites. So, what are these opposites? Because it has to be affordable, you have to build more with less. Because it is mass housing, this particular unit that we will be working on will be occupied by 10,000 families. When it is mass housing, there will be diversity in the composition of people who will be living in this township. So it brought us to this question: how does a unit like this respond to the diverse needs of diverse families? So there's diversity at two levels: diversity at the level of people, and there's diversity at the level of ways and means in which people will occupy these units. So this became a riddle that we wanted to solve. And further on, when we started looking at the unit and we started making, certain propositions around it, we came to this proposition that a house is a collection of human activities, objects, and humans. And there is a very strong correlation between the objects in a house and the way people occupy it. And what are these objects? These objects could be furniture, these objects could be white goods, these objects could be accessories, and whatnot. So, the manner in which these objects get placed within the unit dictates the terms of living for different families. And the manner in which these objects sit in this space, they also have a very strong influence in the way the occupation of the house takes place. So we decided to look at the unit through a set of 6 actions. Okay. And through each of these actions, we said that we should question the whole idea of the rigid unit and the whole idea of compartmentalization. So the first action was to look at the unit the way it has been designed, which is in these 3 compartments and with a opening here to enter the bedroom and a passage there to go to the kitchen and also to the washroom. So in this situation, this space was acting as the circulation space within the unit, right? And we then decided to look at multiple furniture and object arrangements within this to begin with, and then to see what can be done beyond that. Now, for each of these actions, we looked at multiple furniture arrangements, but in the interest of time, I will only be showing one example per action. So this is the first layout that I would like to present. And what we see here is that's the entrance. This is the entrance to the bedroom, and that's the kitchen and the washroom. And space is finite, needs are not necessarily finite. What we forget when we design a unit is that the unit grows with the family in terms of the way it is used, not necessarily in size. We think of the family as a static unit, but family members grow with time, their needs and desires grow with time. So in many ways, a house has to keep pace with the change in the family dynamics. And which is why in homes which are as small as this, the usage of objects which are versatile makes a big difference. What do I mean by versatile objects? Objects that can do more than one thing. A sofa which can become a bed in the night, a table which can fold back into this to allow for a person to sleep there, maybe. A little divan here which can open up and become a double bed. This is what I mean by versatility in the objects. While versatility in the objects is available for everyone to use, uh, how about versatility in space? So every layout, we visualized it in this form, and we also looked at it as an axonometric drawing to be able to, uh, test our ideas. So that's the first action. Now, at the studio, we looked at every action from two different time perspectives. So in the earlier this thing, I'm not sure if you noticed, but we were saying that this is a 10 a.m. scenario. We also had a 11 p.m. scenario in certain cases. And we also looked at this from the perspective of different family compositions. Okay, just to understand how spatial usage takes place. Now, the second action is where we demolish this wall and we construct this wall. So in effect, what we're doing is we are moving the entrance of the bedroom from here to there. And in doing this, we are creating a circulation axis like that. And if I can just use a different pen, to illustrate that, this becomes the sort of circulation path. Now, what this does is it means that I have the space here to do something. It also means that I have the space here to do something, right? This is a very simple affordance that a layout like this enables. And that's how you can then install a study table here for a person. You can have a wardrobe and a dressing unit there. You're creating almost, parallel openings for circulation, and then this becomes the clearly demarcated seating space. This becomes clearly demarcated private space and the likes. In this layout, we also installed a versatile object here, which is a unit which can double up as a work counter or a dining table if it needs to. We then visualized it like this to get a sense of how the space can be occupied. The third move that this, what you see here is another version of the same action where the door moves further up. The door in the earlier case was here. In this case, we move the door further up. In doing that, we are actually dividing the living room into two rectangles like that, and creating a L-type circulation network. And in the bedroom, creating a network Now axis like this. Okay. Now this indicates a different way of occupying space, and we also get to see that what happens when you just move a door on a wall by a few centimeters, a few meters. So that's the uh, you know the point that we're trying to illustrate through a layout like this. This is then how we visualize that, and we now move on to the third major move, and that is, what if I remove that much of a wall from what separates the living from the kitchen. And when we do this, we are able to make certain things happen. One is, we are able to give this room a larger perception of space. Okay. Then we are able to install a unit here, which then becomes very versatile. Why? Because it responds to two spaces. And then it also allows us to utilize the living room like this. In this case, we are retaining the door here, but we are showing a different occupation of objects. We are showing a bed in the middle, which can expand in the night to become that. And we are showing a wardrobe here, a wardrobe there. So this is the third option, and this is how that gets visualized. So the bedroom here becomes slightly more free of objects. You seem to have a fair amount of space in front of it. By having something like this, if required, can also double up as, if you have a movable object, it can double up as a study table or something like that. So that's the third action. The fourth action is, if I eliminate the wall between the living room and the kitchen completely, and at the same time also do this here. In doing that, we get a layout like this. A wall is replaced by a space divider, and which is flexible and not rigid. It becomes a television unit from here. It becomes a kitchen cabinet from that side. It becomes a table there. This retains the character that it had. You can have a wardrobe, a little extension coming out of it, and maybe you can even do something there. The study table here is retained. And that's how this comes into being. Okay. So what you notice is this thing, the rigidity that was there here is countered by making it flexible for the families. The fifth move is, if I do the same thing with the bedroom wall and keeping the kitchen wall intact, it allows me a different set of affordances. The television comes there. The back side of the television becomes a wardrobe with maybe sliding doors. This becomes a display unit from here and a study table from there. You can have a folding bed. You can have another work table. You can have another work table there. So that's how this comes into being. And this is how that is visualized. The last action, and I'm sure by now you may be able to predict what the last action is, and that is, if I eliminate both the walls. And here we'll be presenting two sets of responses just to illustrate or underscore this point of adaptability and flexibility. So this is one. A flexible bed there, a flexible unit, and a breakfast counter there, a continuous ledge which gets capped by a partition and a refrigerator, and openness here. You also have reasonable amount of open space there as well. The circulation is like this, and that's about it. This is how that gets visualized. And we also looked at a slightly more radical version. We said, okay, we'll break this wall, but a family can, if required, have a sliding and folding partition that comes and rests here, and if required, rests there. We just have a storage unit on this thing with the assumption that people may not have beds, but they may have roll up or roll down beds, and which can come out in the night depending upon usage, and make a 30 square meter unit as visually continuous as possible. And in doing this, the perception of space becomes significantly larger. You can create partitions if required. You can cordon off spaces. Now, when we were looking at homes of this nature, and we were looking at informal settlements and the likes, we realized that spaces are not necessarily divided in those cases using rigid walls or furniture. Sometimes they're just divided using curtains. And I just like to, for the architects who may watch this, draw your attention to Mies van der Rohe's Farnsworth house, where everything that needs to be rigid is bunched together in the center of the in the center of the house, and everything around it is just divided using fabric screens. So it may be possible for us to imagine the 30 square meter house like that as well. Now, we made these drawings, and like I said, what I have just shown you is just one example for those first 5 actions, and 2 examples from the last action. We actually in all had more than 40 different versions in total, which is about 6 different ways of occupying each action area. And those of us who understand interior planning using objects and furniture know that this 40 is just a number. It can actually be infinite depending upon the nature of objects that you use. So what we came to through these actions is that it is perhaps not important to have these compartments. We can have an open plan house that tilts the balance of power in terms of flexibility and adaptability and personalization in favor of the end users, and not something that favors construction technology or cost. So from here, once we developed this, our first instinct was to show these actions and these experiments to the developer who is our client. The response was fairly good. We were very unsure how they would respond to a set of diagrams or drawings like this, but the response was very good. They appreciated that the thinking or the intention behind this. Now, we were then, our interest was in how do we take this forward, and we wanted it to go beyond, it being an experimental project on paper to something that can actually get built or get accepted. So we it's at that stage that we started, you know, looking at what we call the actions, uh, that we performed and the consequences of these actions. And then we started looking at what are the opportunities in it and what are the challenges in it. So when we started looking at opportunities, we realized, and I'm sure through the drawings, you will agree that we have demonstrated that an open plan house is more flexible, is more adaptable, and enables more personalization. The other opportunity here was something that the developer really appreciated, and that was by illuminating the walls um, in a 16-storied tower with about 16 such units. Uh, the developer would have saved about 1.2 crores just by not constructing those walls. So what we were saving were resources, what we were saving is time, what we were saving is energy. And here is where I want to sort of build an association between what we did with this whole idea of sustainability. When we talk of sustainability, I think it's important to understand certain facets of it. Certain facets are well understood, like reduce, recycle, reuse. These kind of tangible aspects of sustainability are easily understood by everybody. So when we save cost, when we build less, we consume less material, which means less damage to the environment, and therefore maybe a more sustainable building. I will not claim that this is, a zero carbon building or a zero footprint building. And any claims like this, I always look at it with a lot of skepticism, because the way I see it, any act of building is an act against nature and is an act of violence. And as architects, what we are doing is we are only minimizing the impact of that violence. So our actions has a direct correlation with sustainability in terms of the way we are consuming resources and energy and time. There's another aspect about sustainability to it, and that is a more flexible, a more adaptable space has a better chance of adapting with the changing needs of a family and with the changing needs of many families than a rigid unit, which means that the chance of it being used well through its entire life cycle is significantly higher than a rigid unit. And when that happens, the unit becomes more sustainable because it is able to sustain different ways of occupation. So these we felt are the opportunities that lie in this. And we tested it objectively, quantitatively, and we also proposed these intangible opportunities that there. But there were also challenges. So on first go, the developer was quite excited by the idea simply because he felt that the savings would be of value. In the last 2 years, construction costs have gone up by about 30%, and 1.2 crore saving on about 250 odd units was a considerable, amount. And how would we, uh, you know, how would we then move forward? So the initial, uh, thought from the developer was very positive. So the developer then took this idea to the demand side of an affordable housing project, which is, potential buyers. The developer had tied up with several workers groups workers' associations to deliver affordable housing to them. And when I say workers, I'm referring to maybe a taxi drivers union or an association of industrial workers, so on and so forth. Now, we thought that our idea would be extremely well received by the demand side as well. But to our surprise, we got a pushback from the demand side. And people felt that we may not necessarily be giving them value. And it didn't come from their perception of of space or anything like that, but it came from perceptions that have been built over time. So when we showed them the wall-less, you know, open plan 30 square meter unit, a lot of people felt that this is what you call a kholi in Mumbai language, which means it's just a one-room tenement, and it didn't have the compartments of a bedroom, a hall, and a kitchen. It's here we realize that for the buyer, the bedroom, hall, and the kitchen was a sign of upward mobility in the social hierarchy. They were upgrading from a kholi to a 1 BHK. The rigidity of the 1 BHK didn't matter. It was the upgrade that was happening, perceptually, that really mattered to them. So for them, it was like, okay, we are moving from a two-wheeler to a four-wheeler. But that, moving to a four-wheeler, which was really tying them down, did not matter. So we realized that there is a perception problem with the way in which we are presenting this particular solution. While our belief in the qualities of the solution was very high, the end users were looking at it with a lot of skepticism. They felt that maybe the developer is trying to shortchange them, by eliminating a few things. So there was a lot of these kind of questions that were in their heads. And then we realized that in a country as diverse and large as India, is that if you want to bring about change in perceptions of policies, it is not easy, and it is a very long drawn negotiation between all the stakeholders. So our next reaction to this, it started off with disappointment because we were quite confident that we had hit, the nail, but to our surprise, we realized it's the other way around. So our reaction or response was to maybe engage with the stakeholder groups and see if certain negotiations can be done with them. So the image that you see here of this film from the 70s called Roti Kapda or Makan, where the Makan is a basic necessity, has evolved considerably. The Makan is now closely tied with your identity. The Makan is an aspirational product that you buy. The Makan is very closely associated with where you are in the social hierarchy. And we realize that these perceptions need to be managed. So what we intend to do going forward is to maybe have an outreach program with the stakeholders and have an exhibition of the ideas to demonstrate how some of these ideas can actually be beneficial. The other side of the problem was the supply side. And by supply side, I'm referring to the people who are building these affordable housing projects, which are the developers. With the developers, what we realized is that anything quantifiable was very tangible to them. They were able to understand what were the merits of an idea. But the fact that the developers were building a large township with high stakes, high investment for 10,000 families meant that the risk-taking ability of the developers was very low. They wanted to stick to something which was less risky or less challenging, something that did not involve heavy negotiation. So from the initial, uh, you know, uh, positive reaction, it gradually shifted towards skepticism. And uh, at this point, questions around the design of the unit is still open. No decision has been made, but the balance is tilted heavily against our ideas, despite maybe, proving that it may be more beneficial. So at the demand side, there was a perception problem. At the supply side, there was a problem of taking risks. And the last aspect to this problem were the regulations. And how would the regulation or the regulatory environment receive an idea like this? And this is also something that requires extensive negotiations. And we've started by engaging with officials from the Maharashtra Housing and Development Authority to look at ideas like this a little more sympathetically and not, look at them only through the lens of the DCR. Uh, so we've had one round of meetings and a workshop with the MADA officials, and there is at least an in-principle agreement that maybe this is perhaps more useful as a solution in case of affordable housing. So how do we get the policies to respond to different forms of housing as opposed to the singular imagination of a BHK driven product is something that requires another level of negotiation. So at the end of it, while there are opportunities, as architects, we need to engage and negotiate at three levels: at the demand side, at the supply side, and with the regulatory environment. So at the end of all of this, if I have to look at this with respect to the title, which is design thinking and housing, and if I have to just look at the design thinking framework, which is empathize, define, ideate, prototype, test, then you'll realize that the first step was to empathize with the problem and to recognize that there is a serious issue with very rigid housing units. Next was to define an intent and see how that problem can be countered. Third is to ideate, which is all those actions that we performed. Fourth is to test or prototype those ideas at our level. And fifth is to test it with the people who are going to use it. And when we do this, we realize that it is not a smooth journey at all. It is fraught with multiple challenges. But then housing is not an easy game. Affordable housing is an even tougher game. So with that, I'd like to conclude.
Thank you for such an informative presentation, sir. It is interesting to know the converging points of design theory and application and learn about the steps that follow for design thinking through the example of an affordable mass housing scheme. I'm sure our viewers must have learned a lot from your presentation and as a result must be curious to know more. And I'd like to take this opportunity to ask you a few questions. So like you said, a home is a part of our identity. we often say that foundation of a building lies in an empathetic approach. So, according to you, what is the role of empathy in design research, and how can one integrate it in practice? Like, how does empathy shape the overall design?
Mm, so I mean, one is it is not something that is negotiable or something that is an added feature. Okay, that as a designer you have to, being empathetic is not, you're not doing something special. Being empathetic is, I think, fundamental to your role as a designer. So I don't want to sort of present it as a value added feature. Okay, that as an architect or as a designer, I am also empathetic. I think that should pretty much be the default setting for every architect or designer.
Definitely, it's a necessity and not a choice, right? So I understand that architectural practice is far fetched from design theory, like what we study. How do you integrate design into educational framework and vice versa?
So because I kind of straddle both academics and the world of practice, um, they constantly inform each other. Okay, and it's a unique. I wouldn't say unique. I mean, I'm not the only one who sort of straddles both these spheres. There are multiple people who do this. In fact, uh, that's how it's pretty much been. Uh, you know. Uh, so as a teacher, the knowledge and experience that I develop uh, and form in practice is invaluable. Okay, it it sort of helps me, uh, structure ideas in a particular way. It brings a certain uh, dimension which is uh, informed by the real world of practice. Okay. Uh, at the same time, what academia does, is that it offers a certain form of knowledge development, okay, which I cannot get from the world of practice. Okay, so being a teacher enables me or forces me to read or forces me to write or forces me to think in a particular way, which the world of practice usually does not allow you to. Okay, so that form of so I think it was Farshid Musawi who said this, that in the world of academia I work like a practitioner, and in the world of practice I work like an academic. You know, and I found that a very interesting way to sort of even maybe position myself, in this whole debate between theory and practice. Okay, and I wouldn't say that uh, you know multiple positions are possible and each of them are valid, but I quite enjoy this whole bridge that I am able to build between uh, practice and theory for myself.
That's great, sir. That's the way forward. Can you also please share some of the challenges that you face in terms of collaborative design? Like we know that you practice cross-disciplinary designs and all that.
Mm. What is the question you're asking for? Challenges associated with it?
Yes, sir.
Mm, I can't think of any challenges because we have that kind of a intersectional cross-disciplinary approach to things, and I mean it's also there in the way we compose the teams. It's also there in the way we sort of bring impulses from different disciplines into one particular project. Uh, I have not found any challenges as such in it. It has just been hugely beneficial uh, to have that kind of an approach. So the fact that we are doing a diverse set of services and we are working with a diverse set of sectors uh, just makes it a very fertile and rich, place to be.
Right, definitely so. Can you please tell us more about your initiative, Design in School?
So that is an initiative which is at uh, the moment, uh, under wraps. Not under wraps. It's actually we have drawn the curtains on it. We're not pursuing that anymore. But I can just share some of the uh, work and the assumptions behind it from the past. So our idea was, it sort of started off with our engagement with education sector projects and especially K-12 schools. And we realized that in the school education system, there is no space for design as a subject. I mean, there's space for commerce and humanities and science and even technology, but there's hardly any space created for design in K-12 school environment. And when this question came to us, we started looking for precedents, and we realized that a whole lot of people in, let's say, more developed parts of the world were bringing design education to schools. And that's how we started looking at formats and frameworks for taking design as a subject to schools, uh, as a co-curricular academic program, and as also an outreach program of the design community with students.
Yes, sir.
So it was also about building awareness. So we ran this program for about 3 years, I think, and then we ran into a lot of challenges there, and our assumptions in terms of what our work could do and how we could implement it were all, I would say, misplaced. And we realized that schools operate in very different ways. Their objectives at times are very different. And somehow, when we realized that there was no alignment, we then stopped, this particular thing. But when I say stop, we're not doing anything now. Who knows? We may do something in the future if the right opportunity comes.
Right. So, my last question, but definitely not the least one. What is the thought process that informs the 6 steps that you mentioned in the design thinking part, like in this affordable mass housing scheme?
So, expand, define, ideate, prototype, and test.
Right.
So, ideate is where, so expand is where you look at the problem and you expand the field of the problem and you look at it from multiple perspectives. Okay. And you test the assumptions that have, you know, uh, brought you to, let's say, a particular idea or a solution. And from there, you start identifying problems. So define, which is the second step, is where you define the problem. Okay, what is the problem? So for us, the problem was that we were working with a very rigid unit design. So define was, can there be a more flexible, adaptable unit design which can be personalized at scale? That was the question. So once we asked the question, the third stage was where we started this whole process of ideation, which is working with different ideas. So this whole idea of looking at it through these 6 actions okay, is not something that we started with. It is a retrospective frame that we are giving to the actions. We just started drawing, and one drawing took us to another and another, and then we realized, okay, maybe there is a pattern, and the pattern is this. Okay, and these 6 actions can have several more permutations and combinations. Then we started prototyping it, which is what ideas which were at a very sketchy stage, we started formally drawing them as plans, as axonometric views. We were not able to prototype it physically, right? The best way is to prototype. Imagine each of these units getting physically prototyped. Okay, but architecture is a very difficult medium to prototype. You know, you can prototype a product because the scale is low, but you know, the architecture and design industry's appetite for prototyping is very low. So prototyping then gets reduced to visualizations and drawings. Okay, there are examples. We are engaged with another project where we are actually prototyping units and testing them.
Yes.
Okay, but maybe as we move forward, we've done one prototype, but that one prototype is for the first action. So
Right.
prototyping is the level of drawing. Testing is when you take your ideas to the stakeholders, which is, like I said, the supply, demand, and the regulatory environment.
Yes, sir. So that was very insightful, sir. And on behalf of all of us at Class Academy and Resource, I would like to thank you for sharing your thoughts with us today. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.